Hello, this is Fiona Cuthbertson coming for the pod to record another episode of So You Want To. If you've ever felt overwhelmed trying to keep up with a workplace rule that seems to change overnight and want to know how these changes affect you, you're not alone. So today we're cutting through the noise and driving straight into the brand new employment law that's set to reshape how millions of people work, hire and get paid. And to tell us all about it is John Colbert. John is on the Central Executive Council of the GMB and he's an experienced employment law advisor with experience and demonstrated history of working in the legal services industry to help ensure people have the right protections they need. Welcome, John.
Hi, Fiona, and a big welcome from sunny southwest London that you know well.
I do. So, firstly, can you tell us a bit about your career and how you got involved in union work?
I left school in 1982, which was in the height of one of the biggest recessions that the country was facing due to some economic changes. Also, at that time, we were in the midst of the Falklands War. So I came out of school at 16. Not a great deal of qualifications, but I've been educated. And there was this kind of rumour going around the country that people were going to be conscripted into the army to face the Argentinians in Falklands. And a lot of people of my age were like, well, where on earth is the Falklands? But luckily that didn't happen. I went into a number of different jobs, like on a building site, tying exhaust fitting. But then I found myself unemployed for about a year and a half, and on what in those days were the youth opportunity schemes, YOPs as we used to call them. But I was trolling through a newspaper advert, was looking for postal workers, postmen, postwomen. And I applied for it. My grandmother told me that, oh, your granddad's name's on a plaque in the London post office. And a good friend of mine who had just been employed there said, they're going to want to know three things. One is how much you want to work there and how you are as a person. Two, have you ever had any family members that worked in a post office? And three, oddly, do you play golf? So I went along to the interview and all of those three questions came up. I answered them very adequately and must admit, Fiona, I did lie about the golf bit. And lo and behold, I got the job. And my first day of employment, as I walked down the road to start my first day, there was all these mass of people outside. And I thought, what on earth is going on? Got to the gate and they were on strike, believe it or not. And they come up to me and said, don't worry, lad, go through and blah, blah, blah. And I was 19 and I stayed at Royal Mail for 21 years. I was a local rep, branch representative, and I ended my time as the Eastern Regional Secretary. When in 6, I was asked by the General Secretary, the then General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, Billy Hayes, if I would go and work for him in headquarters in Wimbledon. And that's when I moved from Milton Keynes to Wimbledon. Worked for 10 years in the Communications and Campaigns Department, dealing with the privatisation of Royal Mail, the Agency Worker Directive, to name it, just a couple of things. And then for the last 10 years, I worked in the legal department of the CW, dealing specifically with the employment law cases. I left nearly a year ago now. I took early retirement. And so I'm officially semi-retired, but I'm on the national executive of the GMB, Regional Council for the London Region GMB, and just recently I've been appointed to the London Labour Board.
So with the new Employment Act, what are the most significant changes that have now been introduced?
For me, there's a raft of changes, but the most significant is the right to access. For years going back, trade unions have always had this kind of external view of cloth caps, smoky meeting rooms, that kind of thing. And employers have always been very reticent to allow trade unions into their workplaces. Some major employers like Amazon have always used constantly union busting techniques so that the workforce don't go to the union. I mean, I remember back in the day when there'd be a company that you would go and look to recruit in and you would park a caravan outside with banners and all that. And there'd be an army of people standing outside waiting to see the workers as they were coming in or out. And it just didn't look good. It didn't look good for the company. It wasn't great for us. But the rights to access means that employers must allow us reasonable access to those employees. And I think that only bad employers fear trade unions. And they're not in the majority, they're in a minority. And I think that there are ways in which we can now, within that framework, we can work with employers about how we can speak to their employees about the benefits of joining a trade union. And one of the things that employers will have to do come October is actively tell their new employees that they do have a right to join a trade union. Now, that can be done very nicely or not so nicely. But as I said before, only bad employers fear trade unions.
And it has repealed the great majority of the Trade Union Act. For example, the restrictions placed on industrial action around notice periods, strike mandates, minimum turnout. Were these changes necessary?
Yes, they were. Not directly for the membership. There were changes because of the trade union administration and the amount of money that we have to pour into doing those kind of things. It was very restrictive on our finances. It was the thresholds and things like that. If you do some analysis on major strike actions, for example, BMA, RMT, the CWU, most of those strikes, actually the result of those were above the threshold that was put in place. 90% of the members in that particular workplace voted in favour of that strike action. There wasn't very many that didn't reach the threshold. But the work that you have to do as a trade union in administration was massive. And it was just about, like most of these laws, Fiona, it's about rebalancing in the regulation and rebalancing what trade unions have to do in terms of their administration. Because if the issue is one that the vast majority of the workforce in the workplace or the industry believes in and thinks it's a detriment, people will vote.
So essentially, it's in order to help you do your job easier, in order to make sure that the union members can essentially get the representation that they need, and you are not stymied in order to try and provide that.
Essentially, yes. It's an administration regulation that we wanted to rebalance. And we are totally in favour of majorities and things like that. But the regulation that was put in really was designed to really hinder everything that the trade union done. So whether it be on pay or terms and conditions, whether it's the amount of staff within a tube station at night, whether it's in the BMA, what is the worth of a junior doctor or a doctor? What is the worth of anybody in the workplace? And the strength of feeling amongst members, workers, women and men in the workplace will always be strong in those areas. And it's very rare now you see strikes that are not about pay, terms and conditions.
And a number of other rights have been changed, including day one rights about unfair dismissal. It's going to be reduced from 2 years to 6 months qualifying service. So how do you think that's going to apply, and how important is that?
Yeah, that is very important. 2 years was far too long. Previously to that, it was a year. It's now down to 6 months. The issue really was around probation periods. It's going to mean that HR departments are going to have more of a focus around, do they want to keep that employee after 6 months or not? So they're going to have to make a fairly quick judgment, where before they had 2 years. I'm a bit worried that might kind of accelerate people in terms of how they view that employee. But like a lot of these things, time will tell. Parent leave, sick pay going from 5 days down to 1, all of those kind of things are at the betterment of the worker.
Do you think there are any other rules that should come into place at this particular point in time that have not been included in this? So, for example, the Green Party are currently talking about menstrual leave for women.
Yeah, that is in there, menstrual leave as well. And I think that is a really good thing. One of the other things that I was disappointed, and a good colleague of mine, Diane Timmins, who sits on the London Regional Committee with myself, has just done a recent article in the Law Society Gazette around the definitions of bullying. There are legal definitions around harassment, but not bullying. And that's a missed opportunity there, because being bullied at work is different than being harassed at work. Being bullied is a more individual kind of thing. And there is no recourse to legal action around that. So if you're being bullied by someone at work, you have to go through the harassment kind of stages. And I think that Diane makes a very good case in her article. That was something that has definitely been missed.
And how are trade unions preparing their representative and members for these changes and helping them to understand where the lines are drawn? For example, the fact that harassment is in there, bullying is only in the Equalities Act. You do have parental leave, but you don't yet have the menstrual leave that, as I say, has been mentioned, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, extensively, we've been doing a number of training courses for individual unions. I'll tell you about GMB in a minute. Through the TUC, they've obviously been very visual on this. There's a number of podcasts. It's all over social media in our world. GMB actually owns its own law firm. And we have done for 10 years. We own it with the Communication Workers Union. So It's a joint venture that happened 10 years ago. And so we have a big law firm in Sheffield, which is made up of personal injury lawyers, employment lawyers, and other legal professionals. And so we have a very kind of vast network and an easy tap where we can get the information off these people very quickly. And we produce briefings, podcasts, we do video casts. It gives the rep in the workplace the tools in which how to deal with these issues and what they should be looking for.
And do you think the number of tribunals is going to increase?
Well, that's the $64 million question, isn't it? I think it will do by purely the fact is that they're increasing the time limit. So the time limits in which you can lodge a claim have vastly gone up from 3 months minus 1 day to 6 months. And so that gives a broader range of people that have been sacked and sat there and thought to themselves, should I go to court or not? The biggest hurdle at the minute is the state of the justice system. I know cases of employment law that have been registered with the Employment Tribunal Services that aren't listed for another 3 years. That is a hell of a long time to be waiting for some kind of justice. So I think one of the things that does need to happen with these law changes is we need to have a new focus around the actual tribunal service itself internally. They're not in a fit state to be able to deal with them quickly. There is no real triage system. You've got the ACAS early conciliation, but it's a case of ACAS speaking to the respondent, the employer. Do you wish to enter into an early conciliation process? They say no, and it all collapses. You're then in the hamster wheel of a tribunal services. I think that there needs to be greater emphasis on triage, because a vast majority of the employment law cases that we have are actually settled out of court. But it takes such a long time to get there. The cases that are lodged in court for 3 years is not acceptable.
Sounds like that's something that's definitely going to be lobbied on then, is going to be changes in the system on the tribunal side too.
When you're locked into an employment tribunal case and there are certain hurdles, the preliminary hearing stages, preparing bundles and things like that, employers are paying solicitors, unless you've got in-house solicitors, they're paying solicitors a hell of a lot of money to put these cases together. And ultimately, halfway down the line, they've done all of this work and then they're settled out of court. And you think to yourself, there's got to be a better system than this.
And how transformative is this legislation for employee rights and for people generally?
Yeah, as I said before, this is more about redressing an imbalance within employment rights. It doesn't give trade unions or the employer any more leverage than what they should have. There's nothing in the Employment Rights Act 2025 that you look at and you think, oh Christ, yeah, that's a real achievement, mainly about rebalancing that imbalance that was there before. And trade unions won't look to exploit any of it. I can guarantee that. We're not looking at it as going, oh, that's a fantastic little thing, we'll go on that. Like I said, the biggest one for trade unions, for me, Fiona, is the rights to access a workplace. I think that having a sensible trade union going in and talking to the members about what we do, mapping the workplace for where the staff are, looking at the staff, talking to people and identifying people that potentially are there to do the President Kennedy quote, it's not what we can do for you, it's what you can do for yourselves, really, and try to form an organising structure that looks after themselves.
What further reforms or challenges do you see?
The big elephant in the room at the moment is AI. That is the big elephant in the room for everybody. And I don't just mean trade unions. I mean for the woman and man in the workplace, for society in general. But the kind of rush for this is mind-boggling. It's very scary at times about how AI is being introduced. And there doesn't seem to be a framework for how it's introduced into employment. We've got instances where workers will leave on a Friday and come back on a Monday, and the employer will say, well, we need to make some redundancies because we've brought AI in and AI is going to do your job. There needs to be a better framework around that. So within AI, it's about protecting the workers whose jobs are going to be directly affected by AI. And Fiona, that comes from everybody. That comes from people in high-tech industries. We represent members in the nuclear industry working for the defence network. down to the Deliveroo drivers. Every drivers, they've not only now got cameras facing outwards, they've got cameras facing inwards on them.
If you've got a camera facing at you as well as forward, that's quite intrusive as well,
Very
isn't
intrusive, yeah. And these things were introduced without any kind of recognition to the workforce. 1 minute they weren't there, the next minute they were there. What is it for? Is it there to map data? So there's nothing wrong with mapping data. Let's take a delivery driver. If a driver has got so many stops during the day and they're getting in and out of the cab, making the deliveries, that kind of thing, and you're harvesting data around that, that's one thing. But if you're using it as a spy on the actual driver itself about what they're doing, that is a completely different matter. And I think that there are a number of those instances, cameras on the work floor, in the workplace, looking at the work floor, the flow of traffic, but they're also looking at how many times did John and Fiona go to the lavatory or whatever. When you're harvesting that data, then that is an intrusion on people's human rights. And what we're asking for, nothing, no more, no less, is a sensible framework in which people understand this is what that piece of technology is there to be used for, and it's not there to spy on people. We're not Luddites. AI is a good thing. It's fantastic. The medical industries are using AI to help better operations, diagnosis, and things like that. But we have to get a balance here around, well, what else could AI be in terms of spy network on workers and things like that?
And do you think that the change in premiership going to impact your work? Do you think it's going to impact the introduction of AI? What do you think about the fact that Keir Starmer is now gone and it looks like Andy Burnham is going to be taking his place?
You and I both know that when you look at the results of local elections that we've just had, I think that ultimately the leader of a particular party that lost very heavily was always in jeopardy. And I think that that's right. I think that Keir had a particular issue around some of the stuff that they done very wrongly right from the get-go. And I'm talking about the way that WASPy women were treated and those kind of things. But I think Andy Burnham is a different matter. I think that he's a very good communicator. I think he's come across well as the Manchester mayor. I think he is that kind of more of a personal, people in the public will be able to resonate with. And I do like some of the things he's already come across. I do like greater devolution. I do think that local people are best placed to decide what happens locally. I think Westminster, the bubble there is a bit arm's length. And I think that the introduction of metro mayors have been a really positive outcome. I certainly know that in Bristol, where my good friend Kevin Slocum was the chief of staff for the mayor of Bristol, Marvin. And some of the work that they were doing there in Bristol was fantastic. And I know that Andy's done very similar in Manchester. So if he's true to what he's saying, that there will be a bit more devolution in terms of finances going to those areas, I think that's a great thing. I really do. But he's got a job. The defence issue is going to be major. He's already said that the reliance on massive hardware, is that really where warfare is going in the future? The cyber attacks and things like that. I think that's the warfare of the future, not massive battle tanks in the middle of the Atlantic. So I don't know. One thing, talking as the mayor of Manchester or the mayor of London or the mayor of Bristol, it's a kind of different kettle of fish when you're talking nationally.
And he's going to move a bit more towards the left with nationalisation and potentially wealth taxes. What do you think about that? Do you think those are good things?
Well, you couldn't have got further to the right than Keir. Even a slight move to the left of Keir is yeah. Well, I mean, is the tax system within the UK fair at the moment? Probably not. If it was me, I would want to have a kind of fresh look at the whole taxation system within. I think it's not right. One of the things that I've been dealing with is the disparity of wealth. Why, as a single parent on benefits, should pay the same as a millionaire for a piece of white goods is beyond me. So there are poverty disparity within the UK. In the West in general, I think that the tax systems are very outdated. I don't agree with some of the tax that are burdening businesses. I think that is a real hindrance to recruitment. I really do. This old socialist, even for me, I can see that those things are a burden upon business. And if they are a burden upon businesses, then recruitment will suffer. And what we're ultimately about, our trade unions have got one principle, and that is the protection of our members' pay, terms and conditions. But you've got to get members, you've got to have people in work to get the members. So it's a fine balance. I don't think Andy's going to be lurching too far to the left, but I think that there will be some movement to more left-wing kind of financial policy.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming to see us today and for us to get your insight and thoughts on this extremely interesting time regarding the employment laws and how we're going to help protect people when they are working. And thank you to the viewers who hopefully enjoyed the show as much as we've enjoyed making it. If you have any questions, please do put them on the podcast. Feel free to comment. If you think it's worth coming back, please like and subscribe. As I say so often, more the merrier. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Hope you have a good week, one and all.
Thank you all.